Tan Sri Abdul Wahid Omar was only 37 years old when he was handed the responsibility of heading one of Malaysia's largest government-linked firms in the form of United Engineers Malaysia Berhad in 2001, having been among a number of high achievers earmarked to help spearhead Malaysia's reform agenda in the early 2000s. It was a difficult job, to be sure, since there were political pressures on top of the daily decisions that had to be made at the corporate level. But since then, Tan Sri Wahid has gone on to have other leadership roles at companies like Telekom Malaysia, Maybank, the state investment firm PNB, and of course most recently at the national stock exchange operator Bursa Malaysia. Many of the decisions Tan Sri Wahid Omar made through these years, through all these jobs, were I'm sure quite difficult. But to my knowledge at least, Tan Sri Wahid Omar carried himself always with the highest levels of professionalism and his trademark humble attitude, having come from such humble beginnings himself. These are traits which I think are worthy of emulating, along with his rules and principles for success, which Tan Sri Wahid shared when we chatted some weeks ago. As always, please do consider subscribing to my channel if you find value in the conversations I have with the guests on this channel, including liking this video, telling me your thoughts in the comments below, and perhaps even sharing it with other people who you think might find value in these interviews. And now, without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, may I now present Tan Sri Abdul Wahid Omar. Tan Sri Abdul Wahid Omar, you are a legend, you are highly respected, and I've been waiting a long time to talk to you on this format, in this manner and form. If we can, maybe start with your early years in Johor. I think you were born in 64, one of, I think, 11 or 9 children.
11.
Not your typical, elite, privileged background. You came from quite humble beginnings. Can you describe those early years for us?
Well, thanks, Joang, for having me here today. Now, I was born as the 9th child in a family of 11 siblings, and my parents, Haji Omar and Haji Alima, it wasn't easy for them to raise 11 children, but Alhamdulillah, they did very well to raise all of us. In Malay, we call it jadi orang, so to speak. But life was hard when we were young. And as the 9th child, I went through hardship with the family. My father used to work with the British military, the civil side in Singapore. But when the British military pulled out of Singapore, I think this was back in 1969, so he was retrenched and he worked as a labourer in the pencil factory in Johor Bahru. But it was tough for all of us. So I still remember there was one time I wanted to join the Boy Scouts in primary school, and you needed some money to buy uniform. So I asked my mum for 5 ringgit to buy the uniform, and we didn't have 5 ringgit. So obviously that's when I realized that we really need to do something to excel in our studies, to do well and to take the family out of poverty. So notwithstanding the hardship, Alhamdulillah, we managed to pull through. We had the benefit of my uncles and aunties who were very generous and sponsored our education. Every single one of us were assisted by our uncles and aunties. And we managed to go through education, primary and secondary education. So when it comes to education, I was able to get 4 A's and 1 C in our Standard 5 assessment test those days. If you can guess, the C was in English. Budak kampung, we don't speak that much English at home, naturally, so I was struggling a bit. But I was fortunate because by that time, the government had set up Maktab Rendah Sains Mara, the Mara Junior Science Colleges. The first one was in Seremban. And one of the objectives of MRSM was to give children from underprivileged background from the kampung the opportunity to be in a boarding school and to be given a good education. And Alhamdulillah, notwithstanding the 4 A's and 1 C, so we went through the assessment test, interview, and was able to get into MRSM Seremban. And I think that's a great institution because it provided the people like me from underprivileged background the opportunity to learn in a conducive environment. And naturally, you have proper bed and so on at the hostels. You have great dedicated teachers and a good system for me to go through all the way until SPM. And Alhamdulillah, at SPM, from the C in English at Standard 5, I was able to get an A at SPM in English. So again, that's actually what good education can do to you, I suppose.
Yeah, I ask people this quite often because for those who don't come from the your typical privileged background, right? They have a hunger, they have this desire to succeed. They know what it's like to not have stuff, to not have food on the table, to not have access to certain things and certain privileges. And then it drives them for the rest of their lives. And many entrepreneurs and many successful corporate people have come from that background, right? I'm sure you retain many of those values and those characteristics because of your early years like that. Would you agree?
Yeah, I mean, I think certainly when you have no safety net, so to speak, you just have to struggle and work as hard as you can. And you tend to appreciate what you have a lot more. And I think you tend to be grateful and you optimize whatever resources. So I guess that's probably why I became an accountant. And we spoke earlier, Chuang, about the concept of value for money. So I think for someone who had gone through a lot, so the concept of value for money is actually real. And how you stretch your ringgit or your dollar is actually important.
Okay, so a little segue here, right, Tan Sri, because for people who come from quite difficult backgrounds, right, and then they succeed in life and they've got suddenly, I'm not saying necessarily that you have, a few $100 million, but,
I don't.
You don't, not many people do. And then you come to a certain vintage, like in a way, the collective, you and I, right? But for people who come from that difficult background, they might still find it very difficult to say, oh, I'm going to have that dish or that restaurant, or because they remember it's seared onto their memories, and a lot of people they don't give themselves that privilege because they can't do it, and then they get older and then they can't enjoy that anymore, and it's a lost opportunity. Also that balancing act, right? When it's time to say it's okay, just buy that thing if you want, it's okay. Do you struggle with that sometimes?
I wouldn't say I struggle. To me, again, I always believe in optimization of resources. For that ringgit that you have, you can buy a lot of things, right? If you are careful enough. Or you can actually waste it on something which is very short-lived. So I think, yes, I love food for sure. But there is a limit to how much I will spend on dinner and so on. So again, if I can get the same experience at a much lower cost, and I will go for that. Would I spend 1,500 ringgit for an omakase, Japanese dinner? I wouldn't.
Probably not, right?
Yeah. But would I spend 200 ringgit on a nice steak, for example? Yes, probably. And if I go to, say, Burger and Lobster, for example, so I spent some time in the UK. So one of my favorite joint is Burger and Lobster. So the lobsters there would cost probably about 200 ringgit, roughly. But again, it's pricey, but it is okay. So I do indulge a bit, but I wouldn't spend 1,000 ringgit on a meal, for example. Yeah.
So the life lesson, financial life lesson number one to maybe a 30-year-old person, right, would be to enhance value for money. Would be to think about optimization of your limited ringgit, right? Would be one thing. How would you advise the 30-year-old person to approach financial literacy at this age?
I mean, the basic rule is to make sure that you live within your means.
Yeah.
I think that is rule number one. And don't overspend and don't borrow for operating expenses, so to speak. Right? It's okay to borrow for capital expenditure, So that means that you want to buy a house, you want to buy a car for you to be able to go to work, for example. That's okay. Something which will bring you benefit in the medium and long term. But don't borrow to go on holiday or have a nice meal and so on. I think that's actually very important. And then the concept of value for money. So I think if you plan well enough, you can get the same thing at half the price compared to someone. So for example, when we spoke about my recent trip to New York, so 9 months ago, I had this email from Singapore Airlines offering a premium economy ticket to New York for 4,900 ringgit, right? So to me, okay, maybe that's something which I should be looking at, knowing that my children, I've got 2 daughters, will be completing their exams in June. So we booked 9 months ahead 4 tickets and paid 4,900 ringgit each. So it became affordable for us. But had we not planned, we would have had to pay double the amount. In fact, on the last few weeks, there were some relatives wanted to actually follow us on that trip, and when you look at the ticket, was the same ticket would have cost 13,000 ringgit per person. So that would have been unaffordable, and I wouldn't have spent that kind of money. So again, planning is actually important. Because when you plan early enough, you can get the same item at half the price, for example. And this is how you stretch your ringgit, so to speak. Yeah.
There's deals everywhere, right? And it's very important because it's a 21-hour flight, and you might want to think about those things when you try and fly that distance.
Yeah, again, it's, the good thing about travel is that it opens up your mind. You're able to see things, learn from them, and hopefully you'll be a better person. Again, it is an experience that if you can afford it, then you should actually go for it, I would say.
Because it's an education, isn't it? And you see how other cultures live, and you can compare and contrast. Sometimes we're too hard on ourselves in Malaysia. We constantly critique ourselves and, we got this, we got that. But then it's only when you go abroad, then you realize, okay, it could be a lot worse than that. Even in the rich countries. I mean, I think we went to Japan, and I mean, many parts of America, you see homeless people in tents in downtown LA. It's incredible because it's the richest country in the world, and they got thousands, literally hundreds of thousands of homeless people on the street. It's crazy. Right?
Yeah, very true, Chuang. I've been to San Francisco, for example.
Yeah.
The Silicon Valley is there, your Palo Alto and so on. You probably have the highest number of rich people in the Bay Area, San Francisco area. But I think anecdotally, from physical exposure, they probably have the highest number of homeless people, and which is very sad. And when I was in New York recently, so there were news about many businesses moving out of the San Francisco area because of the high crime rates and so on, which is sad, really. So I think this is where major lessons for us, in the sense that, yes, we want to be successful, we want to grow the economy, we want to be a developed country, but make sure that we do it in an inclusive manner where no one is left behind. So I think the gap between the haves and the have-nots must be addressed.
Yeah, I mean, I'm hoping that we can try and get to that whole idea, that whole conversation that people like Ray Dalio talk about in terms of the moving tectonic plates of the world, where you got big social inequality in the US, you've got the major powers fighting with each other, US and China, and then the whole spectre of technology disruption. But let's leave that for a little while, Tan Sri, if you can. I want to go back, if we can, to your years in Seremban, and then of course onto the UK, where you got a Mara scholarship, right? And I can't remember exactly the conversations that we had through the years, but I do remember you telling us, or the press in those days, that you have always been an advocate of Malaysia's social policies because it gave you the platform and the opportunities to get to where you are. And if Malaysia can do that for its less and less advantaged, then there's something to be said, right? Can you talk about your ideas behind those ideas?
Yeah, sure. So I think learning from my own experience, so we had the new economic policy. So with the twin objectives of, firstly, to eradicate poverty, irrespective of race. And secondly, to remove any identification of any economic activity to a certain race, right? I think the first one is perfect in the sense that you want to take people out of poverty. And the best way would be to give them good education. And with education, then they can actually be a good person in terms of a career, or they go into business and so on. And I think the same concept must be applied even today. And I think this is where, if you look at all the government policies successively, we're talking about, yes, we need to grow the economy, but we need to do it in an inclusive manner. And that means that you must provide equitable opportunity for people to progress in their life. So I use the word equitable, not equal, because you must take into account the background of the person, right? So one of the things that I always get into conversation with my friends is about scholarships, for example, right? There are some of my friends who would say that, look, scholarship must be based on merit, 100%. So if a student performs well, he deserves scholarship. I would say yes and no. Yes, he or she would deserve a scholarship, but you must also take into account whether he or she comes from a rich or underprivileged background. Because if he or she is the son or daughter of a CEO, for example, of a large company, who can afford to fund the education of the children on their own, then they don't deserve the scholarship. Notwithstanding that he or she may be the top scoring student. I'd rather give the scholarship to someone who have got the good credentials, maybe not 9 A plus, maybe 9 A's or 8 A's, but from an underprivileged background in rural, where the parents are actually poor, and without that scholarship, he or she wouldn't be able to pursue that higher education. So I think this is where, again, on my part, I would always encourage my friends who can afford it, don't apply for scholarship for your children, because allow and give that space to other children who otherwise wouldn't have been able to go abroad to pursue their education, for example.
Yeah, I mean, you can say the same thing about even entrepreneurs and quite seasoned corporate people who have left their jobs to come out into the entrepreneurial space, and they still apply for grants even though they can afford it, versus a guy from the kitchen of his house who is bootstrapping, right? But it's not Malaysia's policies, because the policies are the policies and they're quite well thought out. It's the execution of those policies. And some would say that they've been somehow disrupted through the years, right? Suffice to say, let's not get into a political discussion here, right? But how does Malaysia, because you spend time in the private sector, you spend time in the government sector, nominally as a non-elected senator, right, in the PM's department, but this like maybe 7 years ago already, right? How does Malaysia map out its chart? And again, this is a segue because we haven't gone through even Telekom Malaysia and UEM and all that yet, right? But how does Malaysia even begin to approach, preparing itself for a very competitive world? Our ASEAN neighbours are very, very fast, very, very working very hard. Indonesia, Vietnam. You got this looming spectre of China in the background, maybe even the spectre of a conflict between China and the US. So Malaysia's really got to up its game, right? But we need the leadership to kind of somehow talk to people like yourselves and say, hey, what's the recipe here?
Right. So I think the recipe here is about, among others, apart from the actual strategies and so on, it's about us, all of us, having that constructive mindset. So I always find that we Malaysians, we are overly negative. We are overly preoccupied with politics. And we always look at the grass as being greener on the other side. And we tend to focus on the things that divide us as opposed to things that unite us, for example. And as someone who had run organizations that operate in multiple countries, the ASEAN region in particular, and other financial centers of the world, I've been able to see a lot of things on the other side, right? And my view is actually, yes, we as a country, we Malaysia, there are so many areas where we need to improve. Corruption is actually one, for example. But on balance, I think we're still doing better than many other countries, and life is actually a lot more pleasant here in Malaysia compared to other countries. So if only our people got that constructive mindset and start to really execute the strategies that we have charted for ourselves, and being able to do what we can within our circle of influence, and I think we can get there a lot faster and in a very constructive manner, I would say. So back to your point about ASEAN and China. So I think make no mistake that countries with large population will always have the added advantage because they will have a huge domestic market. I mean, China is the one great example, and Indonesia will be next. But I think we are fortunate in the sense that we are part of ASEAN, 700 million people. Although we only have 30 million Malaysians and then another 3 million expatriates or foreign workers. But I think if we truly embrace the spirit of ASEAN as single market, then we can actually organize our strategies to benefit from the larger economy of ASEAN. And I think this is where talking about, say, the Telkom Malaysia that evolved into Axiata, for example. Then we spoke about Maybank, for example, CIMB Group. I mean, these are the entities that operate in the region. So, and we will collectively benefit from the greater ASEAN region, as opposed to just Malaysian domestic economy.
Yeah, I mean, the ASEAN Economic Community, the AEC, has been mooted for many, many years. Yeah. Some would say that it hasn't been as fast as they would like. But I just want to reference your point of view. And I don't know how much you looked at this in any detail, but countries which punch above their weight versus their population size, right? Sweden will come to mind, I guess. Some of the Scandinavian countries will come to mind.
Oh, really?
In ASEAN, maybe Singapore might come to mind. And not many others, right? What do you think Malaysia, as a small country, relatively speaking, can learn from these other countries?
Well, I mean, obviously, it is always easier to manage a city-state compared to a country with terrestrial areas. So, I mean, you have rural areas as well. So, I think one must acknowledge that. But having said that, there's a lot of things that we can learn from Singapore, for example. So, I think one of the good things about Singapore is their single-mindedness. And naturally, Singapore, being a city-state, did not have the natural resources. So there was no safety net, for example. So I think the strive for excellence had to be there. And they also had the courage to actually bring talented people into the country. And of course, that's being done without disrupting the ethnic makeup of the country as well. So that's something which I think they preserve. And I think the focus on strategy and execution, I think is very strong there. Even when it comes to, say, housing. So the HDB model, I think it's actually a great model, where we've always said, look, here in Malaysia, we have many agencies dealing with affordable housing and so on, but there's no cohesion and so on. And we've always been recommending for Malaysia to actually look at the HDB model, to embrace it, but somehow it's actually not done. And it is my hope that the government will adopt it moving forward. So I think there's enough studies done, recommendations made for that. So again, back to the recipe, is about not only charting the right strategies, but following it through with execution and coming up with policies which are incongruent to supporting the big objective. I always like to take the example of the income level of our people, for example. So we have this situation whereby we have unemployment rate which is well below 4%, right?
Full employment.
Yeah. By definition.
Yeah.
And we have, officially 2 million foreign workers in the country. That's the official number, right? Of course, some people will argue that there's a lot more if you take into account the non-documented workers. But at the same time, when you look at the data, and the most recent data was published by EPF. I remember the EPF CEO in an interview a month ago disclosed that we have 8.45 million active EPF contributors, but 80% earn below 5,000 ringgit per month, and half actually earn below 3,000 ringgit a month. And I think that's actually sad because actually it's very low compared to the rate of progress that we have as a country. So, for example, we've been having consistent GDP growth, real GDP growth of average about 5% per annum since the Asian financial crisis. So that's on real terms. You add the inflation about 3%. In normal terms, about 8% per annum growth, right? So by right, if all our policies align, and if we increase our proportion of wages to GDP, then the wages actually should grow. And therefore, the income of our people should be much higher than where we are today. Why are we not there? Multiple factors. Among others, actually, the foreign labour policy linked to the productivity and so on. So I think there must be that push to encourage businesses to employ locals, embrace automation, so that you can create more value-added jobs, high-paying jobs, and reduce dependence on foreign workers. Comes with it also the concept of minimum wage. Now, minimum wage, we have this fixation about doing it on a monthly basis. So my view is, you should actually look at it on an hourly rate basis, because that will give the opportunity for smaller businesses that may not afford to have one full-time person working 40 hours a week and paying them 1,500 ringgit or 2,000 ringgit per month, so they can actually be employed for, say, 20 hours. So that person can then work in one place, and then the balance 20 hours per week can actually work elsewhere. That makes it more flexible, the balance between the employees and the employer. And that also gives the opportunity for people outside the city areas, for example, to have different level. So, for example, the minimum wage in Kuala Lumpur should not be the same as the minimum wage, say, in Kota Baru. So, you have to allow for that geographical locations. Different areas will have different cost of living and so on. So again, it's about making sure that the policies are pragmatic, flexible, but in congruence and align towards the national objectives and targets.
Well, it seems to me, Tan Sri, that minimum wage policy seems to be a band-aid that plasters a dam which has got a hole in it. And it makes sense to do that, right? But some would say that the reason why 80% of unit holders in EPF earn less than 5,000 ringgit a month is because there's a direct and tangible link with the quality of the education and the ability to command a higher salary, because they can't, because they don't have the ability. Now, you have been heading corporations, since your early 30s, right? Your first position of note was as CFO at I think UEM, or was it
Telecom Malaysia,
yeah. Right? And let's talk about that. And then you've been leading companies all the way through until today. You are the chair of Bursa Malaysia, and of course you also advise at UKM and the WWF, which shows the spectrum of your abilities. But then, in terms of your assessment of the human resource in Malaysia, from 22 years ago until today, and your honest appreciation of their abilities, right? The Malaysian graduate. Right. Can they command a higher salary based on the education that they get in Malaysia? And does the low salary justify? Are their low salaries justified by their abilities from their education?
I think Malaysians are well educated in general, and I think the issue that we have is actually the mismatch of supply and demand. Right? I think along the way. Let's look at the graduates, right? So we monitor the graduate employability for Malaysians very, very carefully, right? So we always say that, look, the graduate employability rate has improved from 84% to 86%, right? Then we start to analyze the quality of those people who are employed. then you started to find that this is based on 2021 numbers. I don't have the latest figures, but 40% of the graduates that were able to find a job within 6 months of their graduation were earning below 2,000 ringgit, right? And 18% actually had a salary of 1,500 ringgit and lower, right? So that's actually reality, right? The graduates that you produce and the salary that they're able to actually command. At the same time, you have that 2-3 million foreign workers, right? And now we have minimum wage of 1,500 ringgit. So the point I would say to our educators would be, look, we're not doing a service to our people, our children, if we put them 3-4 years into university and they come out, 40% of them earn 2,000 ringgit and below, which they could have gotten without them having to go to university. So at the same time, we have the foreign workers, and we have the companies, the EMS companies, the electronics and electrical companies in Penang, crying for more talent, because they're saying that, look, now we don't have enough local grads. We need to bring in those from India and from other countries to fill up the vacancies, right? So to me, there's this huge mismatch between supply and demand. So what we need to do is to really go to the ground, roll our sleeves, and figure out, okay, industries, what are the human capital talent that you require, in which area, what skills, and so on. And you go to the university and say, look, okay, universities, this is the demand, and how do we then match it, right? And therefore making sure that whatever graduates or technologies that we produce will be those human capital talent that's needed by the industry. So it's not a matter of the intelligence, and we Malaysians are as intelligent as anyone else. After all, we have many Malaysians serving in other countries, right? So Malaysians are highly demanded in Singapore, Middle East, in Europe, even in China, for example. So there's no issue about the intelligence. I think it's a matter of matching the skills and the demand with industry. So I think that's something which I refer to the congruence of policies and execution must be there.
Well, it's a very complex and multi-layered argument, because then we talk about the universities and how fluid they can be in terms of delivering an education which is not only employable but also well high-paying. Then you've also got the Singapore phenomenon, where it is a very open labour market policy where local Singaporeans compete with foreigners of very high calibre for very high quality jobs. And then you can say that their gross national income per capita is something to the order of 50,000 or even 55 to 60,000 US dollars per year, versus Malaysia's, I think, is somewhere around 22,000 today. I'm just guessing at the numbers, and these are probably old numbers as well, which is about 3 times Malaysia's caliber, if you like, right? Employability at a salary level. So then it's all about education. It's all about the quality of the education that they delivered. And then you as an employer, Tan Sri, when you assess CVs from across the board and to fill positions, right? What can you tell about a local graduate versus a foreign graduate? And why is it that, Malaysians today still prefer to send their kids to foreign universities when they can easily get into local universities?
Right. Well, I mean, in terms of intelligence, again,
So raw intelligence is one thing, right?
No, I mean, in terms of intelligence, to me, they all have equal intelligence. It's a matter of exposure, right?
Yeah.
So I think, make no mistake, that if you have someone graduating from a UK university, for example, you can expect their command of English will be better compared to someone who actually would graduate from a local university. So, and I think this is something which you must take into account. And of course, generally, if people who graduate from Malaysians who graduated from UK universities, chances are either they come from a well-to-do family to be able to be sent there, or they had the benefit of scholarships and so on. And typically, if they are those who had benefited from scholarships, they would rank among the brightest of the students for them to be able to actually to get the scholarships in the first place, compared to those who study in the local U. So I think it's a matter of exposure in general. So I think this is where it is important for employers when they employ, you have to look at the background of the person. So I'll give you an example. There was a time when I was at Maybank, we were looking for 20 young executives to be the apprentices for our investment banking outfit, Maybank Investment Bank. And so out of 20, when the final outcome came, I saw the list, and they are mostly from overseas grads, whether it's UK and Australia, very few from local universities, right? And then naturally, most of them were from Kuala Lumpur, in terms of the family background, and very few from East Coast and from East Malaysia, Sabah, Sarawak, right? Then I asked for more details into how did we screen them and so on. And I noticed that they all have to go through the aptitude tests, and they were in English. And I would say it would give a disadvantage position to the local grads. So if you're not, you don't command, or you don't have a high level of English comprehension, you will fare worse compared to someone who had graduated from a UK or Australian universities, because again of the language, right? So I think it's therefore important for you in your recruitment policy to embrace that diversity, to take into account background, right? So you don't want everyone to have that monoculture from Kuala Lumpur and Petaling Jaya, privileged families compared to people from rural areas. So do take those backgrounds into account. And I can assure you, when we did that, we make it a bit more inclusive, make sure that we have someone from Sabah, someone from Sarawak. Once they are in the group, they are given similar opportunities to excel. They perform as well as those people from the privileged families in KL and PJ, for example. So the point I wanted to make here is actually be inclusive, right? Take into account the background of the people. Make sure that you have a diverse group of people in your organization, and I think your organization will do a lot better.
Yeah, that tribalism affects corporations as well as societies alike. That's why, because we feel familiar with the people that we come from, went to school with, of our own background and color and profile, right? So I think a lot of corporations find it difficult to actually put that into execution, into practice. You can see the same thing in Japan and South Korea, homogeneous cultures and what have you, right? Can you talk about the value an organization derives from having a diverse background, a diverse profile of staff force? It sounds quite ephemeral, because we think, we want this diversity. And it's not just gender diversity, it's not just racial diversity, it's also age diversity, background diversity, educational diversity, right? Local grad, foreign grad. That kind of diversity, right? What kind of benefits can a corporation get?
Well, spot on, Chuang. I always believe in diversity as a source of strength for any organization. You're right, not just in terms of ethnic and gender diversity, but across.
That's just layer one, but it's layer 2 and 3 and 4 as well. As you know.
Indeed, yeah. So I think maybe you start with the danger. If I always believe in this concept of affinity to prejudice continuum, right? So what I mean is that as a human being, it is only natural for all of us to have affinity towards people from the same race, same gender, same religion, same state, same school, same profession, and so on. Penang, Johor and Johor, Kelantan, and so on. So it's natural that we have that affinity, right? But we must never allow that feeling of affinity to overcome us, such that it may become favoritism, right? And if you don't control it further, it becomes cronyism. And at the very extreme, it becomes prejudicial to the interests of other people, right? I've been in organizations where half of the management team members came from the same school, right? Then, of course, when I asked how come that's the situation, the first reaction was, it's all based on merit. I said, no, excuse me, how is it possible that a school that produces 150 people or students a year can make up half your management team, right? And likewise, when the CEO says from one state, suddenly you find that the majority of that, or a big portion of that team members will come from the same state. So I think, it's actually only natural, but you must never allow that feeling of affinity to overwhelm you. And how do you know that you are probably practicing some elements of favoritism or cronyism, or being prejudiced towards a certain community? Well, if the composition of your team members is disproportionate to your stated purpose of your organization or to the environment that you operate in, so chances are there are some elements of favoritism or even cronyism at play. Now, again, you're talking about the benefits. So when you have people from diverse background, number one, you avoid this groupthink concept, because if you have someone from the same background, so in terms of knowledge, it will be limited to that small grouping. In terms of network, it will be limited to that small grouping, right? As opposed to having people from diverse backgrounds. So, for example, I'm an accountant. I'm very cautious about not having too many accountants in my team, right? Because if I have another accountant myself, it's fine. Yeah. So, but if I have my head of strategy also an accountant, and my IT person also with accounting background, there'll be an issue because it'll be very accounting centric. So I think it's important for you to make sure that. So maybe the strategy will be someone from engineering background, for example, as opposed to be an accountant. So likewise in terms of ethnicity, gender, even universities where they come from, and their prior exposure. So for example, I'm in Maybank now. I used to be from Maybank and on the board of Bursa Malaysia, for example. Our CEO is from Maybank. I'm from Maybank. Tan Sri Farid alias joined our board last year. And he's from Maybank. So we really have 3 people from Maybank. That wasn't by design. It so happened that Datuk Omar, who joined Bursa before I do, was from Maybank. But once I have 3 people from Maybank, I want to make sure that the the next time we have a vacancy on the board, shouldn't have a Maybank background. It should be from other organizations, for example. So that's where you bring diversity. So you have someone from other organizations, so they will bring in different perspectives into your organization. And likewise, people or different nationalities too, were relevant, right?
Yeah, actually, the benefits of that can be extrapolated to countries. I'm not sure you agree with me, but when you compare, say, the economies of Germany, the US, and say Japan, right? The gap between the DAX, the stock exchange in Germany in the 70s, and the gap between the DAX and the Nasdaq in the 70s were not that far apart. And then now you fast forward 50 years, and Silicon Valley is very famous for hiring the best and the brightest, right? So whether they come from Croatia or Russia or China or India, you've got multi-mega cap, $1 trillion market cap in the form of Amazon, Facebook, Apple, Alphabet, and that kind of thing, versus Germany, whose DAX has really stayed stagnant through the years. And it's a big bugbear for them, right? That the Siemens of the world didn't really come up as fast as maybe the German government would have liked. But then the German government and the German corporate sector is quite homogenous, right? Yeah. Male, advanced, engineers, right. Quite monoculture lah. And you can say the same thing about Japan as well. Japan has suffered through 30 years of stagflation, but they've been left behind. Now that the world's third largest economy, maybe less. And then you've had corporate failures like Olympus, for example. And Japan is, old, male, Japanese, right? Very, very staunch in their ways. Right. So knowing that to be the fact, right? Malaysia has done a reasonably good job. I think the GLC phenomenon has become much more diverse in the last at least 15 years, 10 years. You did a great job at Maybank in terms of diversifying the management team. Can more be done?
Well, before I answer that, perhaps going back to that country description. Yeah. So I think
it's maybe a bit too simplistic, but it seems to me there could be something there.
But also must be more holistic in the sense that so you want economic success, right? So diversity will make a country become more successful. So as in the US, for example, but you must also make sure that success is supported by a more inclusive socioeconomic policies, right? We spoke about the homelessness in the States, right? In New York, in San Francisco, and so on. So whilst they've been successful to raise the income level of the elites, and overall I think they've been successful, but I think there are gaps when it comes to socio-economic, as we can see. And you also have, some parts of the states who are actually very insular in that sense, as opposed to, say, in Germany and Japan, where although they may not appear to be as successful from an economic perspective or in recent times, but perhaps the quality of life of the people there is a bit more homogeneous, and in general, there's not too big a gap between the haves and the have-nots in these countries. So I just wanted to make sure that, make sure that you have that strong economic success pursuit, but make sure that it's also inclusive, no one is left behind and so on. So back to your question about diversity in the GLCs and others. So I think it is granted that in the public sector, so you have more Bumiputras in that sector, but by the same token, in the private sector, which are non-GLCs, you have the other, where the Bumiputras make up very little at the management level, right? So I believe there's room for greater diversity and inclusion on both sides. And I think at the GLCs, we've done well in general, whether it's CIMB or Maybank or Axiata. I think we all embrace diversity, and that's reflected in the board and at the management level. At the same time, in some of the other non-GLC entities, I think there's a lot more room for greater Bumiputra involvement too. So my request would be for everyone to embrace this concept of equitable opportunity and embracing diversity, because again, truly, I do believe that diversity is a source of strength, and that must come together with equitable opportunity. It means that you provide everyone the opportunity to be equitably successful, whether in business or in employment. Right.
Providing always the basic assumption is that they are going to be good at the job and they have the right attitude and they're willing to work hard, because it's not just enough to have an equitable policy, because ratios and quotas by itself, they don't guarantee success, as we all know.
Yes, so that's why I use the word equitable, not equal.
Yeah.
Because equitable means that you take into account, there must be that prerequisite of merit, right? But you do take into account the background of the people.
Yeah.
So if you're gonna go purely based on merit, the poor will remain poor, right?
Exactly.
So and the rich people will continue to be rich, right? So all the scholarships will go to the rich people and not to the poor. So I think that's why the concept of equitable is actually important.
Yeah. And I mean, lest anyone forget, America became the world's wealthiest country on the back of its immigrant workforce, whether it's the Italians and the New English from the 17th century, all the way to the Russians and the Indians and the Chinese in the 21st century, right? That whole spectre is under threat right now, as we might discuss in the future. But let's go back to your time in Telecom Malaysia. And, back in the day when we were reporting, me and my reporter colleagues, you came on the scene and we're like, well, this new guy, Abdul Wahid Omar, he's not from MCKK, he's not from some upper middle class, and he's come in as the big boss of CFO at Telecom Malaysia, and then you went on, you kept going higher and higher up, and it's not easy because from someone of your position and your profile, it wasn't the formula in those days lah. The formula in those days was, as we talked about, right? That formula. What did it take to succeed? And what, I think more importantly, to upgrade that reply, right. What does it take to succeed in the corporate world?
Right. So, Chuang, on my part, at a personal level, as an accountant, my ambition was to be a chief financial officer of a major public listed company.
Which you did at the age of 36?
37, yes. 37, so I was 37 when Telecom Malaysia hired me as the CFO. And to me, that was it. That was the ultimate role for me. I never expected to be a CEO, but when that opportunity came later in the same year, in 2001, I took it on. And I took it on because at that point in time, I was familiar with the Group. I was familiar with mergers and acquisitions and the corporate restructuring required to solve and to turn around the Group. And plus, I was also young. At 37, I felt that, okay, even if I were to fail as a CEO, I could always go back to be CFO of another company. So, hence I took on that challenge. So, to me, for you to be successful, you surely, as a base, you must have a certain level of competency. Make no mistake that no one would have all the competencies required, but at least for that task, for that organization, you must have the basic competencies that's actually required. So in the case of Group, for example, it was in respect of corporate restructuring. And in the case of Telecom Malaysia, it was different. So obviously it is telecommunications, technology, and do I come from that background? No. But I had been the CFO before, so I knew the business. So that's actually some part of knowledge that I have that I can complement it. So I think the same thing applies to all situations. Now, what does it take to be a successful person? Well, I always say that number one, you must have the basic qualities of being a good and successful leader. And to me, what are they? Among others, the top three would be you must have integrity, you must have competence, and you must have humility. Integrity, as you know, is about doing the right thing even when no one's watching. And if you observe, if you were to truly hold on to your principles, your reputation will precede you. Competence is about having the right skills and knowledge to do the job well, and it's also about the need to constantly update your knowledge, and because we learn new things every day. And I think we are fortunate today that we live in an environment where there's a wealth of information out there that's able for us to actually harness at our fingertips. And the third part is actually humility. Humility is about treating people with mutual respect. It's about staying grounded to your roots. And it's about knowing that we all live in this world for a greater purpose in life rather than for our self-interest. And humility is also about knowing that we don't know everything and we need teamwork in order to succeed. So if you to ask me, I'm not as bright as some other people, but that element of humility enabled me to get the help and support from other team members, from my board, and other stakeholders too. So I think when you embrace that spirit of humility, you tend to find that people will be there to support you. So to me, so these are the three ingredients, the prerequisites to be successful. And of course, you need to work hard and work smart.
So I'd like to add that what you just described was the basic recipe for your, for success. But there's much more to it than that. And I sometimes in the last few years I've been working with PLCs and corporates, to help their management teams and CEOs to deal with people like myself, people in the media. And you've been I raise you as a case study many times with the participants in my training classes about how your style of dealing with the media, and in fact with your peers, has always been one of graciousness and patience and courtesy. And you've been a very likable person. You're a very agreeable person, right? And that has won you favor. I think my gut feel is that in order to succeed in the world at large, not just in the corporate world, you've got to be a likable person. And I think when you talk about humility and with this framed in the idea of likability, agreeableness, that goes a really long way. Tan Sri Jamal of Axiata was another person of that mold, right? Very likable, very patient, and very popular among his peers. Do you think the idea of likability and agreeableness is an important soft skill to cultivate in any aspiring person? Because you've got your typical hard-charging CEO, right? Very aggressive, very assertive, right? And in America there's that kind of mold, But what do you think? Because they're juxtaposition, right? You've got the agreeable guy, and then you've got the hard-charging, aggressive guy. Which one are you going to be? Which one should you be?
Well, Chuang, to me, I would say just be a good person, be a pleasant person to deal with. Just because you are in authority doesn't mean that you have to be mean to other people. It doesn't mean that you have to always say no. As an answer, the first word that comes to mind. So I think it's important for all of us to treat, again, other people with mutual respect, and deal with people pleasantly. Because when you're pleasant, people will open up to you, right? Whether it's actually your boss or your subordinate or your counterpart, right? And you get a lot more out of the people. So, for example, even when you deal with your subordinate, if you're overly aggressive, you're too hard, they're going to be very timid, right? So to be intimidated, you're not going to get a lot of them. But if you treat them well, you ask questions in a manner which is polite enough, then you will elicit that knowledge and input, ideas from them, right?
Yeah, certainly the press, when I was in the press, we really liked you because you were a very nice guy. You were always very patient with us. And contrast and compare to some other CEOs who are, a little bit less affable, And what you say is very true.
Yeah, again, obviously we don't know everything. So where we can help, where we can give the answers, we do, right? But if we don't know the answer, we just apologize. We don't try to
be too clever,
too clever in a sense, yeah.
So the flip side of that is this. Okay, so your management style, being affable and being quite consensual, works in Asian context because that's the way that people of this area are, right? So I just want to get your thoughts because some research from MIT, for example, right? This guy Jackson Lu and his two other colleagues, he compared the difference in promotions and success in the corporate world from South Asians and East Asians. So South Asians are typically your Indian CEOs, right?
Right.
And your East Asians are your Japanese, your Chinese, your Koreans and those kind of CEOs, right? That ethnic background. Typically, the South Asian CEOs did better than the Asian CEOs, East Asian CEOs, in terms of being promoted. Now we can see Sundar Pichai, right? For example, AJ Banga, for example, right? Nuri of PepsiCo, many examples, right? Alphabet, Google, the new YouTube CEO is also from India. So that seems to work. That seems to be the recipe that works in America because they love the assertiveness, right? They love the hard-charging guy, right? In Asia, much less so. But so can the Asian CEO transplant himself from there. If he or she desires to go and work in America and on Wall Street, he can't have that. He can't have that, right? Can you try and be both? It's tough, right? What do you think?
No, it's a matter of environment. So I think we have many Malaysian CEOs who are successful, obviously within the context of this region. But it's a matter of exposure. So if we, if a Malaysian CEO were to be given opportunity to lead an American entity, for example, I think they will be able to do as well.
I'm not sure I've ever seen a Malaysian Wall Street CEO.
It's a matter of opportunity. So I think this is again sometimes one thing which I find that we Malaysians, and me included, I think sometimes we are a bit too shy to talk about our success. So sometimes we are overly humble, and I think sometimes we must be able to actually be able to articulate a position where we're able to actually market our organization, our country. And ourselves. So I think that's something perhaps we can improve on ourselves.
Starts in the family though, right? Because the typical Asian family is like, don't talk so much, eat your food, go and study,
Yeah.
So
I think
it's a cultural thing as well.
Yeah. Maybe less of that. So it's about being truthful. Yes, being humble, but yet at the same time, not to be inferior. So I think there's a big difference between being humble and having that inferiority feeling or inferiority complex. Right?
Yeah, I remember Azran Osman Rani, formerly of AirAsia X, he's been on the podcast as well. And he said that when he was very young, his family always said, go and read books, and they were filled with books, the house, right? And they were always asked your opinion on things. So they were very vocal from an early age. Right. And Azran has done really, really well through the years, right?
Yes.
Because I think of his verbal ability and his ability to speak up. Right. And I think Sheryl Sandberg said the same thing in the book Lean In with women, right? Not enough women speak up and say, yeah, I'm just as good as that fella, but he's good at talking and I'm not, I don't want to talk so much. Okay. So you've gone from telecom to, UEM and Maybank, big companies. Now you're Bursa Malaysia chairman. What are some of the principles of dealing sideways, dealing up, dealing down? You talk about humility, right? What else? What other soft skills? What other things have you learned from dealing with these people? Because, you've done very, very well. And sometimes people need to know what is the secret recipe behind succeeding in the corporate world, beyond just the basic things that you talked about.
Well, I mean, obviously you must have that technical competency that I spoke about, right? So the substance must be there. And once you have the substance, and people will accept you for what you are, Now, beyond that, it's a matter of how you deal with people, how you're able to articulate your viewpoints, how you're able to elicit the feedback from other people, how you're able to negotiate with your counterparties in arriving at a solution. So it depends on your role. There's a big difference between being a chairman and being a CEO and being part of a management team.
Okay.
So different roles require different approaches and so on.
So talking about different roles and putting on different hats, right? You spent 4 years in politics as an unelected senator in the
3 years.
2013, 2016, right?
Yeah.
So I know 3 to 4 years, let's just say, right? Very different role. You were in charge of the EPU, Taraju, Equinas, private equity. So a varied portfolio and a very powerful portfolio. What did you learn from those 3 years?
Well, I mean, just to be clear, I wasn't interested in politics. I had no plans. I had wanted to retire at Maybank. But when that call for national duty came, and someone who had benefited from the new economic policies, government scholarships and so on, so I felt compelled to do that national service. But I was very clear that I wanted to serve only 3 years, and as a senator, one term, 3 years. And after that, I wanted to go back to the corporate sector. In terms of what do I bring into government, well, the idea was to bring private sector's perspective into government and to give government the courage to devise and implement policies that are necessary but may not be popular. So, for example, we spoke about the fiscal consolidation, subsidy rationalization, and that includes the implementation of GST, for example. So what have I learned in the 3 years in government? Well, one of the things which I've learned is that when it comes to stakeholder management, it was actually very easy in the corporate sector because although you have many and different types of stakeholders, but you are able to compartmentalize the stakeholders and deal with them accordingly. So, for example, at Maybank, shareholders, we have 60,000 shareholders, but they all have a common objective. They want higher profit, higher dividends, and better share price.
Yeah.
Employees, 40,000 employees, again, they want competitive remuneration, good career progression, conducive working environment. Customers, more than 11 million customers so they want competitive pricing, they want good products, innovative products, they want great customer service and so on. So you're able to compartmentalize them and deal with them accordingly. But in government, there is only one group of stakeholders called the Malaysian public. 30 million Malaysians, although we have a population of 33 million, but 30 million Malaysians. They come from different backgrounds, various shapes and sizes, and different expectations. So it's actually not easy to appeal, to come up with a policy or decision that will appeal to all 30 million of them. So that's actually the challenging part. But having said that, all you have to do is to really look at your mandate and do your best in the mandate that's actually given to you.
Yeah, it seems to me that people who live in a civilian world, right, they're quite normal. But then when they enter politics, they become a different creature. And time again, when I read about what certain politicians say in the press, I'm like, how and why would you want to say that? But then when I meet them in person, they're very, very nice people, and you're like, this is very different from what I hear and think and read about you in terms of perception. Why is there this chasm, right? I asked Idris Jala the same thing, Dato Sri, right? And it's a tough one because when you enter politics, you've got to be a different animal, right? You've got to do things and behave in a certain way. And oftentimes political policies are inflationary in nature because they just drive up the cost of doing stuff and in a way impede the country. But it's got to be done for popularity's sake. Do you agree with any of what I just said?
Well, first of all, before I joined the cabinet, I have this different perception of ministers.
Yeah.
So there's some element of fear when dealing with them, right? So you see them as a different group of people. But the moment I attended the first cabinet meeting, I realized actually they are all normal human beings, right? So just like you and me, no different. I always say in Malay we have this term called ada hati, ada perasaan, meaning that it's a normal human being. Right? So, and honestly, they're all normal human beings, just like you and me. They have aspirations naturally when it comes to politics, but other than that, same. So I think they become different on the political stage, and naturally, as politicians, they have to be elected, right? And to be elected, obviously, they must look at policies. And unfortunately, sometimes popularity will take precedence over what's actually pragmatic, what's actually necessary. But that's actually a conversation that must be done collectively at the cabinet level. And for me, because I'm not a politician, I don't aspire to be one. So the input has just been, again, the private sector's perspective. And likewise, I had the benefit of working alongside Idris Jala. And during my time, we had Paul also in the cabinet. So we are not tied to any political considerations, so to speak, when giving our views. So I think I would say that, look, we do what we can within our circle of influence, within our area of authority, but it is my wish that collectively, not just look at what's actually popular, what's actually pragmatic, what's actually necessary, to be implemented. And I think this is something which people have to decide on collective basis. Yeah. And of course, there are some technocrats. Once they've entered the cabinet, they like it and they transition to become politicians. But that's okay. It's a matter of choice. But some of us prefer to be in the private sector.
Yeah, it's a real. I mean, once one enters politics, one can sometimes be bedazzled by what's on offer. Suffice to say, Malaysia has been on the cusp of greatness for a long time, right? People talk about how Malaysia is a high potential country. One of the Asian tigers it's been like that for many number of years. And we find ourselves, Malaysia, in quite a tough spot right now because the ringgit is quite weak. The economy is, structurally, quite unsound in certain areas. Our education sector needs work and what have you. And, IPO market, capital markets. I think we need more quality issuances. You're the Bursa Malaysia chair. Let's not get into the weeds on that discussion. But what more can be done to keep the economic buzz alive?
Right. Well, I think make no mistake, times are tough at a global level, regional and domestic level, right? So the environment is actually challenging, especially when you have increasing interest rates globally. So when that happens, it'll be a threat for future economic growth. It's going to be disruptive to fund flows because when US, Europe and UK increase their interest rates, naturally there's movement back to the developed markets compared to the emerging markets and so on. That will cause a bit of disruption to other economies too. And this is something that will happen from time to time, and it is important therefore for us to really focus on fundamentals. So on our part, it's a good thing that we are very balanced when it comes to our economic fundamentals. We're not over-reliant on commodities, for example, although it helps when oil price actually increase. But I think having said that, in terms of diversity of our economic structure, we're okay. In terms of liquidity, I think we're okay. The good thing about Malaysia is that we have a very sound financial system, banking system. balance between capital markets and the banking system. Our banks are very well capitalized. They are liquid. They are very well managed from a risk management perspectives, and they are very well regulated and supervised by the central bank. Where we could do better, obviously, would be in terms of consolidating ourselves and coming up with a clear policy moving forward and following through with execution. Now, as a country, we have successive development plans, 11th Malaysia Plan, 12th Malaysia Plans. The challenge has always been in execution. So I think it's important as we come up with blueprints and plans, all of us must follow through with real execution. Unfortunately, sometimes we get distracted. So I think let's make no mistake, over the past 5 years, the changes in government have been disruptive because the consistency in policies and people get distracted and not really focusing on the real issues. But having said that, all these changes happen without any, I would say, disturbances in society. So,
and that's been...
so change government. I mean, you have had the same government for 60 years. When it changed, there were no military trucks, no tanks on the road, and so on, and things happen actually very peacefully. So I think that must be a great plus for us. Means that there's some level of political maturity, democratic maturity in Malaysia, and that's something which is great. So what we need to do is to translate that to the mindset of our people. So I always use the example of Thailand, our neighbor up north, right? So Thailand is a country over the past decades had gone through coup d'etats, changes in government. They had the red shirt and yellow shirt. They continue to have government influenced by the military, for example, and they had election and still the prime minister still not sorted out and so on, right? But noticing those challenges, as a country, they continue to progress. Why? Because their people are very single-minded and they're less preoccupied with politics. Their businessmen would run their businesses as well. Many of them have grown to become global champions. Likewise, their civil service focus on their task at hand and progress. So now within all those challenges, they continue to progress. And they're always on a united front. They will never talk bad about their country. Likewise, Indonesia. They do have some political challenges, but they're always united when it comes to dealing with external parties. Whereas here in Malaysia, sometimes we tend to talk bad about our own country. So I often meet foreign investors, and for example, the people from EU, from Germany in particular. So Germans have been investing in this country for a long time, and they've been expanding their businesses here. But sometimes they say, look, we want to do more, but sometimes actually your own people, nations, talking bad about your own country. And we don't see that as we operate here. So I think if all of us Malaysians can be more positive-minded, be constructive, and be less preoccupied with politics.
Well, then
right?
the next question is...
No, I think this country can really propel and go a lot better and move forward better. And really focus on execution of the plans that we have really laid out.
Well, then, Tan Sri, the next question is which people are the ones speaking ill of the country? And I mean, the truth of the matter is, and here we're on icy ground here. It's like a family of 3 children, right? And one child is clearly favoured over the other, and the other 2 children are feeling a little bit disenfranchised, and therefore they may be the ones who are speaking ill of the family. I'm only guessing here, right?
Yeah.
So maybe unless that structural issues is at least evolved in some way.
Yeah. If you look at the data, right, the actual realities on life, right,
but
it's actually very different. If you talk about
I understand economic share of the pie and employability and salaries and everything, right?
Look at opportunities. So I think you look at the list of the top 40 richest people in the country, right? Look at the successful people in the corporate sector and so on. So really on the ground, it is very different. So I think sometimes we talk But,
but here's the thing.
Yeah.
That policy which you spoke favorably of, and which has resulted in success factors and successful people like yourselves, has been around for 40 years, and the same imbalance, at least in anecdotal terms, continues to exist in some form. I think it's been reduced, especially in urban parts of the country, but that inequality still exists. So that means that policy might be a little bit, in need of work, shall we say?
Yes, so that's it. That's it in the execution, right? So I think that's why we spoke about the need for equitable opportunity, and therefore policies must be based on needs, right? So I think in many of the cases when it's actually implemented, it wasn't done properly. Of course, there are some elements of corruption in some places and so on, but all those will have to be addressed. But I think if we go back based on needs, right? You can be, Bumputra, but if you come from rich family, no scholarship, right? Clearly, and that's already being done
or a
today.
7% discount on a I'll try luxury penthouse, which
right.
Actually, these guys, they don't need a 7% discount, right?
Very true.
Yeah.
And therefore, that discount should go into a fund for affordable housing.
Correct.
Right? So I think we must encourage that. So I think that's something which which can and it should be formulated. So I think that's why going back to that equitable opportunity. So give discounts and scholarship for people who need, and that's in many areas already implemented. So scholarships are no longer given to children of CEOs, right? Because there was a time when we opened up the GPA scholarships, and we found that it was based on merit, and suddenly we found that, hey, how come 50-50 Bumputra and non-Bumputra, but we found that there's a lot of children, orang kaya, getting it from both sides.
Should never even accept, even at a personal level. Don't take it because you're denying the next kid.
Very true. So I think those in many cases already addressed, but I think that should be expanded into all policies. But I think the thing is, sometimes again we tend to amplify the imperfect things. We tend to focus on things that divide us, look at the glass as being half empty, and so on. But honestly, if you look at the actual situation, it's actually not as bad.
Yeah.
So
you know how media guys like me, right? They're very cynical people, right? And there is no greater cure for my cynicism than going abroad to another country, whether it's Nepal or Japan or even America, and then to realize, actually, Malaysia is bloody good for what it is, right? And then you realize, oh my God, we've actually got it really good here. We don't have much time left because I know you've got to go off. What are your investing principles? Because I think for someone like you who is very with it in terms of his financial, control, right? How do you invest? What is your approach to investing? And I think more importantly, advising people on financial literacy for the young and old alike.
Right. I always focus on the fundamentals. Again, I'm that conservative accountant, if like.
Hence the premium economy. There's still economy, right?
Yeah. So when I invest, for example, I look at the companies that are well run, not in the sunset industry. Then I look at the financials in terms of the PE multiple, in terms of the price to book, and so on. So if there is a company that's trading at a single-digit PE multiple that pays decent dividend, and that's trading at half price to book value, that'll be the kind of company that I would invest in.
Yeah.
As long as they're not in the sunset industry. But then again, that doesn't mean that you always make money. Of course, in Bursa I can't trade, and I don't trade. But I think it's about truly long-term investment. So my view is actually, if you do that consistently, then I think in the long run you get returns that you deserve. Sometimes you make mistakes. You think that the company is actually well run, and over time challenges came in after 1 or 2 years. Then obviously you will need to actually make that portfolio realignment. Then you make some adjustments as necessary. Now, in terms of financial literacy, I mentioned earlier about the need for all of us to live within our means. It is okay to leverage, to borrow money for capital expenditure into goods that will bring you benefits in the long run. So within the context of a person, naturally is a house or a car that you need to get you to work, or if you need to drive Grab, ride sharing, for example, a car which is actually economical and so on, it's okay. But don't borrow for investment, don't borrow for operating expenditure for holidays and so on. Again, it's no different from a company. Likewise, so a company borrow to invest in their capital equipment, machineries, and so on. And I think likewise for governments too, right? So you only borrow for development expenditure, things that will give you returns in the long run, and you don't borrow for operating expenditure, for example.
I'm glad you raised that, because America seems to be not doing that, not taking that advice, and the dollar seems to be under threat. Again, I know we don't have much time, but just want to get your quick thoughts on this, right? De-dollarization, the debt levels of the American currency, the possibility of it being replaced by another currency, and of course the whole US-China thing, which we talked about earlier, and the social conflicts within America, which is a manifestation of the issues that they have, right? How does one address those? How does one think about those things, and how does one prepare for those things?
Yeah, if you look at the numbers, if US were to be any other country, then the rating will be a C. So it will not be a AAA rated entity. And I think that's on account of the US dollars being the reserve currency. And why is it a reserve currency? Well, it's because most countries...
Well, they won the Second World War, didn't they? And Bretton Woods as a result.
So most countries trade using their currencies.
Yeah.
So I think for as long as countries trade with each other using US dollars, so the demand for US dollars will always be there for settlement, and therefore for reserve currencies. But over time, I do believe that the countries will start to get smarter, and I think growingly there'll be less...
demand for T-bills have been falling off a little bit, in fact more than a little bit.
Yeah.
Right?
So I think it's inevitable, but it will take a while. So I don't think you want shocks. So I think once you're in the financial system, you must know that you must never create a situation of shocks. Shocks will be bad for the economy, bad for the financial system. So you want to do it gradually. So I think it's inevitable, but it's a gradual process. And I think we need to move away from a unipolar world or bipolar world. So it needs to be a multipolar world eventually. Yeah. And that means that being less dependent on a single currency.
So at a personal level, right, you know all these things. You're aware of the movements, both domestically and internationally. How are you positioning your personal approach, portfolio, or thinking, and all these kind of things, right? Soft reply, the kind of thing. How are you preparing for this future?
Well, I mean, I come from a large family. As you know, apart from having 10 other siblings, I have more than 40 nephews and nieces. I have 2 children. And of course now grandnephews and grandchildren.
So you're like the patriarch now, lah.
Well, I mean, we are a close-knit family, so we don't have to invite other people for kanduri, for example. Our own family gathering will have easily 60 people, 80 people. Hari Raya will have 100 people, for example, just immediate family members. But I guess what I want to say here is I'm grounded in Malaysia, and therefore all my assets are actually in Malaysia, and therefore investments are mainly actually in ringgit. So within that context, I don't invest abroad within that context. So I think there's a lot of opportunities already here in Malaysia. The good thing about investing in Malaysia is that you're not exposed to foreign currency risk. You have that opportunity to generate real returns, and especially now when you have many companies being listed but trading below book, single-digit PE, and decent dividend yield. Right? I think these are the investment opportunities that you have. Plus, the good thing is actually when you invest domestically, that capital is mobilized for domestic economy, it creates business opportunities, it creates employment. So I would always advocate to prioritize domestic investments beyond financial returns, potentially, but there's also the other value-added benefits in terms of supporting the growth in the local domestic economy and creating more employment for the people. So what we need to do is to come up with the policies that are better so that all this positive economic growth will translate into better income for the people and better well-being for the people. I truly believe in that. I don't think it's actually it's just a talk, and it can be done. So you have the numbers, you know what needs to be done. All we need is actually that political courage and cohesion between the public sector and the private sector to work towards this common goal. And don't be distracted by occasional, I would say, distractions and optional things. Right? From time to time, you have issues. You have corruption, which must be addressed for sure. You have, someone being mistreated, your dress code, and so on. So those are cases in isolation, right? But don't harp on it and make it becoming something that's festering and making that noise. So I think that's why my request to Malaysians, look, be pragmatic. Yes, things happen from time to time, but are they common or they are in isolation? If they are in isolation, so let the authorities deal with it, but don't harp on it again and again, because that will create a very negative air, and certainly never talk bad about your own country. So deal with it, but be constructive, if I may. So, Chong, if I may, if all of us can do what we can within our circle of influence, and be constructive and uphold the principles of Rukun Negara, I think insyaAllah, this, God willing, this country of ours will do a lot better, notwithstanding the challenges.
Yeah, that was fantastic, Tan Sri. Huge honour. Thank you for doing this.
Thank you, Chong.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.